please welcome founder and publisher of COURIER, Leigh McGowan.
What a welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. As you just heard, I'm Leigh McGowan. I'm the founder and publisher of COURIER. We wanted to put this event together in the close aftermath of the election for a number of reasons, but mostly because in a moment where everyone who fought so hard, many of us for years and years and years, to prevent the outcome that we're now all grappling with, everybody's trying to understand what went wrong. And we at COURIER believe that these conversations we're going to hear tonight are absolutely essential to that broader question. I hope everybody agrees that no election is won or lost because of any one strategic or tactical error, as was the case in 2016, which some of us had the unfortunate privilege of also being a part of. The outcome of this election was brought on by many factors, including both strategic decisions made by the candidates and campaigns, as well as the resulting impacts of decades-long strategic decisions and investments made by both parties and movements. Tonight, we're going to dig deeply into one contributing factor that indisputably had a major impact on this election and the direction of our country. And that is the role of the changing media and information ecosystems that we all, and all Americans, exist within today, and how the competing parties and campaigns worked within or around those ecosystems to drive their most potent messages to voters. This cycle, Democrats outraised and outspent Republicans at almost every level, primarily spending their resources on cyclical paid advertising and paid canvassing programs. For whatever reasons, the campaigns and party committees poured billions into these programs and very little, if any, resources and energy into leveraging year-round, values-aligned media infrastructure, while Republicans, of course, did the opposite. That is, of course, not the whole story, but it's an important part of the story of how we got here that needs to be more deeply understood in order for us to chart a course forward. I founded COURIER after 2016 in an effort to diversify our movement's investments beyond cyclical advertising, to build year-round media infrastructure at the local and national level that would emphasize reaching Americans where they are, both physically, where they get their information and how, but also emotionally, with factual but transparently values-driven news and information that would earn their trust. I'm so proud that over 5 years later, our 12 newsrooms across the country are reporting, publishing, and reaching tens of millions of Americans with good factual news and information. We've earned the trust of over 5 million online subscribers across the battleground states and reach over 90 million Americans with our content every single week online. We don't look anything like a traditional news organization, and that's the point. Trust in traditional media, like all institutions, including our political parties in America today, is at a historic low. And yet, trust is the most important currency anyone seeking power can and must possess among their supporters. So where are Americans placing their trust today? Who do and will they trust to keep them informed? What investments can and must be made to right our ship so we can meaningfully build trust to inform Americans about what we stand for and what we won't stand for in our politics and in our country? These are the questions that we hope to explore with all of you tonight. This election, our progressive and political movement lost a lot, and the coming years are going to be darker and harder than many of us may be able to imagine or stomach right now. And without political power, the greatest and only weapon at our movement's disposal moving forward is the power of information. Information to inform, educate, enrage, and mobilize Americans to fight back against cruel injustices and to take power back into their own hands. Of course, what information we spread matters, but if we don't own the channels to distribute that information rapidly, at scale, and in ways that the majority of Americans will consume, what we have to say simply won't be heard. We have an information crisis, both in America and in our movement to protect democracy and advance progress. And there can no longer be any debate over the urgent need to address it, to understand how the other side has managed to earn trust and support through networks of liars and lies, and to invest in owning, building, and scaling our ability to distribute information that is honest, but also empowering to the Americans, both who have been and will continue to be deceived by the other side, as well as those whose trust our side has lost through their out-of-touch attempts. If we didn't know before this year, I hope that we can all agree now that trust is an essential ingredient to earning power and winning power, and it simply cannot be built through even the best-tested advertisements with $1 billion behind them. Trust has to be built day in and day out, year-round, year after year. It has to be built through and by people and content that demonstrate an understanding of where its audiences are, not just where they spend their time, but also how they feel and see the world and their role in it. We have a responsibility to understand better how we got here in order to build the path forward. And I hope the conversations we hear tonight will shed light on some of those lessons and ideas from where we go from here. I'm so excited about the brilliant folks that are donating their time to have these conversations with you all, and we hope this is the beginning of many. Thank you all for being here. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our first panel, Building a Bench of Talent and Influence, moderated by Glennis Meagher, co-founder and president of Generator Collective, among very many hats, and a slate of brilliant creators you guys are going to meet shortly. Thank you.
Hello. Welcome. Whew, okay, we are sat. It's exciting to see so many people in the space, just to show that, how's my sound? Okay, great. That there's interest. So we are going to be talking with our panel a little bit about the talent that we currently have on our roster. I'm sure there was a lot of conversations being had in this room and elsewhere about who is messaging and how are they doing it. Before we get into it, we're going to do a quick series of introductions on who we are and why we're here. Hi, I'm Glennis. Tara introduced me. I'm the co-founder and president of Generator Collective, and I'm a digital media strategist. I ran one of the largest TikTok interventions this cycle on TikTok, obviously. And yeah, now I'm here today.
My name is this working? Is this on? My name is Adam Mockler. I work for a digital media company named MeidasTouch. I have my own YouTube channel with 700,000 YouTube subscribers. I've been to like 30 to 40 different Trump rallies, and I have really respectful conversations with Trump supporters, try to find out how I can move them towards our position. And yeah, we're just trying to build a new apparatus as these next 4 years go on.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I'm the co-founder of a digital and media strategy firm called Group Project. And before that, I was the chief content officer for Crooked Media out in LA.
Hi, I'm Leigh McGowan. Most people know me as Politics Girl. I created the digital media brand Politics Girl. I'm the host of the Politics Girl podcast and the author of the best-selling book, A Return to Common Sense. And I'm a digital media creator and hoping to expand that in the future.
And hi, I'm Josh Cook. I run Good Influence. We are a network of news and issue-focused creators, and we get to work with talented people like those on the stage. And I am also an advisor to COURIER, which is a new collective of voices coming together to try to take back the message online with folks like Leigh.
Amazing. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You can tell we have some amazing minds on the stage, so I'm ready to get into it. Okay, so many of you may have heard an increasingly hot take immediately after the election saying that the left needs its own Joe Rogan. Tanya, you were part of the team that started what is arguably the most robust podcast infrastructure on the left. thoughts, question mark?
Oh, I love that question. That's a great question. I mean, let's just start here with the whole Joe Rogan thing, which is Joe Rogan's audience dwarfs Crooked Media's, and there's a reason for that. Joe Rogan is not a political influencer. He's not. He sits at the center of a bunch of vectors of interest, mostly for men, but for men and women. Health and wellness, science, MMA, you know, all of these things that trip. We live in the For You internet. The internet, the algorithms speak to us. They are to reflect the kind of content we want, and we fall through that waterfall into the kinds of content that get fed back to us that way. He has such a broad interest set that he falls into a ton of people's algorithms. So he was able to build a huge audience. Politics was one of those interests. Crooked Media is a political company. Now, I'm not gonna say it has a huge ceiling on its audience. They've successfully built a really, really impressive audience. We did, and they did, and a lot of people in this room were part of that. But that's only one vector of interest that a lot of us have. If you think about yourself as a consumer instead of a political strategist, you watch a lot of stuff. You have a lot of interest. You're gonna find a lot of content that is persuasive to you. Joe Rogan kind of really, really maxed out on driving a lot of different people with a lot of different interests to him. And so when we think about building a Joe Rogan of the left, what left? Like which politics, what part of the spectrum? The left as an interest set, or like the left as like an outcome of the content? And so when people are talking about what's the Joe Rogan of the left, I'm like, well, what are people interested in? It's a little bit like how Hollywood might be like, what's our next Barbie? It's like, I don't know, you're gonna find out when you actually make that Barbie. Like, you have to find the talent, hope that they have like a broad enough interest vectors to bring people in, and then, as a lot of people on the stage will talk about, make sure that you yourself, if you're helping that content creator or you are a content creator, are informed and can help guide people when they're having political conversations towards one that's constructive and not just, you know, I'm just asking questions.
Can I add?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I think that the question of who is the left's Joe Rogan is the wrong question to begin with, because it's what the left does all the time, where we play defense. We're like, well, they had that and they won, so what can we do that's the same as them? That's not how we should be doing it. We need to see a hole in the market and fill it, rather than read their script and try and act it out. And they've done that over and over again by creating things and then funding them, creating things and then funding them. We don't need the Joe Rogan of the left. We need to fund the Joe Rogans that we already have, right? We're not doing that. We're creating all these little tiny ecospheres, and then they lean on the mainstream media. The left has always leaned on the mainstream media. That hasn't helped us at all. And I think the thing is that we're constantly doing this defensive thing. Well, they did that, so we'll do this. They're telling a lie, we will try and tell the truth.
Yeah.
Whereas the truth should already be out front. Yeah. We should have already put our things out front.
Well, Josh, you, with what you're building with Chorus and what you've been doing over the last election cycle, we also know with these content creators that are all over the ecosystem that they have different audiences. And that Joe Rogan, to your point, the Theo Vons, they have culture-first audiences that happen to be a messaging tool for the right because they get in there. What are we doing on the left to start finding those audiences and those content creators? What do we need to do? How do we continue to build our bench when we're looking at the same creators every election cycle?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, just a couple things I think we should like start with. We're going into this sort of pretending like we don't know who we're reaching, and I think it's actually, we haven't taken the time to find out and figure out new ways to determine our audiences and to like really define who we're talking to. This cycle, we did a lot of work with, I don't know, some wild number of creators, both in our system and sort of outside of our ecosystem. We tracked on our side at Good Influence.
This is your work with Good Influence.
This is working with the Good Influence. It's getting to Chorus.
Yeah.
We tracked 6 million plus clicks and interactions off content. We were able to match back a huge majority of that to a voter file and to actually see who we're moving from a household perspective. And what we saw, again, this is a microcosm. This is everyone who viewed content, then consumed it enough to be interested in taking an action, to learn more, to know something, to do something additional. a link in a bio, it's 2 clicks to take any action right off social. When we looked at all of that, what we saw was we're moving just as many people who we would define as Democrats, known Democrats, with a support score that says, oh, we should ask them to volunteer, we should ask them to move. But when we're talking on issues, when we're talking about things that move hearts and minds through really impactful voices, what we also saw was we were moving just as many people who are technically on the other side of the aisle. But what they were relating to were trustable faces that were earnestly laying out our values and presenting them forward. So I don't think the issue is, where is our Joe Rogan? I think what we need is, how do we support the people we have? And so that's what Chorus is trying to do. It's creator-led. Well, I'm here purely for structural support and nothing else. It's all
Not
ideas.
yet, at least. You never know.
I'll do whatever Leigh and others say. But what we're really trying to do is build out the support system so that rather than putting the pressure on every organization that's represented in this room, which is a lot of really impressive organizations, to fund an entire ecosystem, we can set up something that is self-sustaining, that has real inputs for ongoing support, that can do things like sign a lease for studio space in different cities, that can provide benefits to creators. I mean, when we take a step back and sort of look at the creator space, the one tragic flaw we still have on our side is that we effectively have a gig worker economy that we're taking full advantage of to try to move our issues forward. We have a gig worker economy where people are living issue to issue, moment to moment with the organizations they're working with. That's not a knock on the organizations, but it just means we have to change the way that we're setting up and supporting this ecosystem. And I think that's the thing that we really have to sort of shake up.
And I want to build on what they were saying. Again, it's not even just about Joe Rogan. It's more about this ecosystem that he's created around him and the way that right-wing politicians interact with that ecosystem. So I'm sure most of the dudes in this room my age know that this Joe Rogan universe is like inescapable. There's Theo Vaughn, and Jordan Peterson goes on Theo Vaughn, then goes on Joe Rogan. And I always say, like, if Pete Buttigieg went on Joe Rogan's podcast 3 times, he could probably undo a lot of the harm Charlie Kirk has caused among young men just by going out there. And Pete Buttigieg, I love his philosophy about going into these spaces. I think Democrats, it's a broader issue here, but Democrats need to be interacting with these spaces. We need to be building out these voices, and that's why I love what you guys are doing. But yeah, again, the Joe Rogan question just misses the point, as someone said, because it's more about the people surrounding him, the people that he boosts up, and then the way that somebody who's just casually interested in health or like working out then is in the RFK Jr. feed, and then it's just a really brutal pipeline with the algorithm, yeah.
But I also triggered.
What's that?
So we're also triggered by the
Can we but I don't even think, here's the thing, thank you.
Rephrase the question.
I don't think that we needed Joe Rogan himself as much as you just mentioned Charlie Kirk. I think we need a Turning Point USA.
Without the Nazis.
Without the Nazis would be best. Yeah, that would be best.
That's a good one. Yeah, when the same thing with Turning Point USA, that's the perfect example because they're doing an America Fest thing this month.
Let's take a beat.
Okay. Yeah.
Who wants to explain Turning Point USA for those who don't know? Does anyone not know what Turning Point USA is in the room? Okay, there's a couple, so let's...
For that dude back there,
Yeah.
Turning Point USA is basically like this. It's an organization that was founded by Charlie Kirk. You know who that is. He founded it. Okay, so he's this right-wing dude. When he was like 20 years old, he founded this organization where he went to different college campuses. He tried to register people to vote. They eventually got more and more funding, and I hope I'm explaining this well, but they eventually got more and more funding, and they built this apparatus where they're at like thousands of college campuses across the country. Have you ever seen those change my mind things where like someone will be sitting at a college campus arguing with the students? That's Charlie Kirk doing that. Those clips go viral. I have friends that know nothing about politics, and they're like, did this person on the college campus actually say this? And I'm like, yeah. So Turning Point USA has created this massive media apparatus, and to loop it back, they're doing something this month called the America Fest. It's in Arizona, I think, and it's like all the worst people you know. You see Vivek Ramaswamy, RFK Jr., some washed up actors from the 90s, some health and wellness people, but then it attracts a bunch of different demographics, and then that's how you build a successful ecosystem, I feel like.
And that is what you are trying to build, Josh, with your work.
Well, I think the biggest piece here is we need to support the voices that are replacing what's left of mainstream media, and we need to do it constantly. So when we talk about what we need to build, what we need to build is something that lasts not from one cycle to the next cycle, but we should be talking about 10, 20, 30, 40 years down into the future. There's a full collapse of what used to be like this publisher-driven space, right? Like the Washington Post is 2 blocks away. They don't have a business model anymore. I'd argue every creator we work with has figured out small things that if you put them together, actually have a lot of self-sustainability to them, and we just need to share those resources and that knowledge. So a lot of what Course has done so far is just conversations creator to creator about, hey, how are you scaling so fast here? Or how did you figure out this one piece? Some creators have had the blessing to have the resources to invest in like a person or two. Like imagine if we actually provided them the resources to do this right. So this is not about any org, I think, here trying to create something and be like, we're going to build our own Fox News, we're going to build our own Turning Point. What we really need is just to like distribute the money out to the voices who are actually doing the work and talking to the people. I mean, Adam was talking before about just like what he wants to do next year. He has a very full vision. He knows what works. He sees all the analytics on his content. I'm not going to tell them anything you told me, but like those are the things that we need to sort of double down on. And it's really a trust thing. Trust that these voices are breaking through. We also have data, but you got to trust and like let it happen. We analyze and analyze and analyze, and we miss the whole thing going past us. So I think that's what we really want to change.
I also want to say just really quickly, you said it goes back decades. You could probably trace it to like Rush Limbaugh and his radio show just exploding. He gets a lot of funding and then that evolves. But I also want to say, if you're thinking about creating content, please don't wait to get funding, because when I think of digital media, there's this concept in software programming where you want to turn your bugs into features. So with digital media, yes, we don't have the funding that Tim Pool has or that CNN has, but that gives us the opportunity to create this lean, mean business model where essentially we're not beholden to any interests, we're not beholden to anybody but our audience. So some of these bugs with funding, yes, we do need funding, but don't let that stop you. You can flip that into a feature where you're actually able to take advantage of that and scale a really tight model. MeidasTouch, for example, doesn't have that many employees, but we pull more views on YouTube than CNN and Fox News on a monthly basis.
Well, I want to pivot to platforms. So, Adam, you have a large following. You have over 1 million across all platforms. So you have over 700,000 on YouTube alone, which is very large. Congratulations. Seriously, it's hard. It's hard to get those 700,000. And some of the autopsy reports we're seeing, we have a pretty clear image that we did okay on TikTok. Like our message was heard, but we did horrifically bad on other platforms such as YouTube. So as we look to growing this media ecosystem, where should the left be doubling down on and or investing more in? And this is a twofold question. I want everyone's feedback on especially the second part. What are your thoughts on Blue Sky?
So, yeah, really quickly, again, just to bring it back, it's not even about targeting a specific platform. I mean, Russia did target Twitter, and I guess that worked really well, but like, it's not even, it's about broadly just creating the ecosystem. Again, having these voices interacting with each other. And someone said on the left that like, they have to beg any Democratic politicians to come on their YouTube channel, even though they have like 2 million subscribers. Meanwhile, you turn on Tim Pool's, I don't know why I keep using Tim Pool as an example, but you turn on his show, and he's always got some like wacky right-wing figure. And when it comes to Blue Sky, I think there's potential, but if I'm gonna be 100% honest, I do see some scary signs with purity testing on there. I think we need to drop some of the purity testing. And when I go on Blue Sky and I see Mark Cuban saying like the most innocuous thing, and someone is like, go back to Twitter, Mark Cuban. I'm like, you guys need to chill.
Yeah, it potentially silos. Does anyone else have any thoughts on the different platforms we should be looking into? And then also if it's helpful, harmful, neutral to be investing in new platforms where we potentially are siloing ourselves?
Well, I think that kind of goes down, like when we're talking about audiences, I think that's like the most important thing, because we have to know who we're reaching. If you're a creator, you have to know who you're reaching, because you could be, you could be creating a huge library of creators who are all talking to the same people. And that's not necessarily effective. And so when we're looking at platforms, and also platforms are changing how their algorithms work all the time. And if you're a creator and you depend on these platforms to make money for your entire brand, and they change one thing, we saw that with Facebook and video ages ago, where they changed one part of their model and it destroyed a lot of media companies that had pivoted to Facebook and video to build out their entire company. And so when we talk about platforms, we have to be very aware that like we are not in control of the very thing on which we are building our brands. So, that's just, I think you guys can speak more to that and the concern than I can. But I do want to be really specific about when we look at data and we talk about, and this is why the Joe Rogan of the left thing really is like something I want to unpack, which is our audiences who we think we're talking to and who we're like, we're really reaching them, look at these numbers. Those numbers might not be the people that we need to be reaching. And the smaller, like micro influencers who are reaching smaller people, but a completely different group of folks, might be the more impactful, influential, and important creator. And figuring out, as strategists in this space, how we identify those people, what platforms they're on, and supporting them, like, data cuts both ways. And sometimes I've seen that, like, the left can be very in love with data, and that's great. We love data, we love numbers, but it can't be the entire strategy. So, and this is particularly true as platforms are like owned and by like more and like one person who's making singular decisions about what's happening on that platform. I don't know, just hypothetically, if there was like a CEO. But yeah, I think that's just one thing that we could factor into our strategy a little bit more, is understanding our own biases when we're looking at content and judging what's successful, being like, there are entire worlds on the internet that we don't know about, that other people participate in, that we should know about.
I think it's important that you have creators on this stage and people that do the data and that kind of thing, because I know that for me as a creator, I don't look at the data because I don't want it to affect the actual product that I'm making, what I'm putting out there. I never looked at the data. I never monetized any of my platforms at the beginning because I didn't want to say, oh, these videos do better, so I'll do more of these because that will be where I make money. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make sure that what I was creating was worthwhile, that it was filling a need, that it filled a hole in the market that wasn't being filled, and I wanted to do it authentically. And I think that because I did it like that, my reach grew authentically. So I now have, 2.5 million followers, and I only know that because my husband tells me, and he follows all my data. But I think it's really important that creators do the work, and then there's people like these guys that are following the data, because that's how you make authentic relationships. That's why people trust you. That's why the new media, like I think you're asking about what media to follow. I think YouTube is the future. I think that's going to take over from mainstream media. I think that things like Blue Sky are important because there's a reason that Elon bought Twitter. And it was because it was a town square. It was because it was a place that we could seek out experts in fields like immunology or science or journalists, and we could curate a feed that allowed us to know what the truth was. It was a place to build a resistance. It was a place to build community. And he did that. He bought it and destroyed it on purpose, so we would have nowhere to go and nowhere to unite. So I think having places like Blue Sky, even Threads, as a place where people can come together and connect and organize and plan and push back against propaganda is essential. So if that's going to be Blue Sky, then it's Blue Sky until they ruin it with, a for-profit model. But I do think it's really important that creators keep doing the work that is authentic, because that's where I think that's the future. I think people can tell now when people are doing it for clicks and hits, and they can tell when you're being authentic with your work.
Yeah.
And when you talk about pushing back on propaganda, I think we can distill a lot of this down to just the pure volume that the right wing has right now when it comes to propaganda. You open X, it's like 9 out of every 10 tweets in my feed, even if I'm not following right wingers. The volume is just absolutely insane. And I think the volume will follow if we get like likable faces, we get the funding, we get everything we need in place. But it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle. Elon Musk will send out some absolutely BS tweet and it'll have like 90 million views or whatever, and then the response that's correcting him has like 14,000 views, and you're like, this is not sustainable. We need a way to, and then on top of that, of course, Russia is incentivized to boost all of this information, all these algorithms. So YouTube is the future, absolutely, but it's also about the volume across all platforms, I think.
And ownership.
I want to pivot a little bit to the tension that we have felt. We definitely felt it after the DNC with legacy media. Leigh, you have a very large platform, and you have started to parlay that into CNN. The legacy media is where, a lot of people still get their news, but we do know that many more people now are getting their news and information, especially Gen Z and millennials, online. So do you think now that legacy media is taking the digital community more seriously? Do you feel like they're just doing it because they think that by just having you on a panel that, on their news, that they're going to reach your audience. What do you feel is the energy there, and do you think there's a future there, or that we should just continue to build online?
I think legacy media is a for-profit media. I mean, that's what it is. It's a for-profit model. And they take a look at my numbers or someone like Brian Tyler Cohen's numbers, and they put us on TV, A, so we can represent the left, and they don't have to fact check, and B, so they can capitalize on our numbers online. So I think CNN is being smart as a business model putting me on, because if I clip something from myself on their show, it'll be 2+ million hits. If they clip something from their own show, it'll be 30,000 hits. So they are using me for my numbers, just like I'm using them for legitimacy, right? And I think we need to be able to legitimize the social media creators, the people that are making independent media, and we do that, unfortunately, with money. There's a reason we listen to Joe Rogan. It's because somebody gave him $125 million to do that show, right? That legitimized him, as did the backing of Sirius and the team he got to do that. Otherwise, he would just be Joe Rogan, the guy from Fear Factor, or Joe Rogan, the guy, you know what I mean?
Lest we forget.
Yeah, lest we forget. But it legitimizes them. So I do mainstream media in many ways. I did it so much leading up to the election because I could see that no one was pushing back on what the truth actually was. So I chose to do it not because they paid me to do it, but because I thought the truth needed a shot. And it's like being a salmon swimming upstream on those shows. And they favor the right-wing creators. And I don't know why they do that. I did the show that I've been doing a lot lately post-election. It was my first time doing it post-election. And they've always favored sort of the right-wing talking points. But post-election, it was striking how much they were doing it. And again, if you return to it being a for-profit model, at first they were trying to say, we're trying to keep both sides of the audience. So they were both sidesing everything. Now they're saying, we are afraid we're going to lose our broadcast license because this new administration has said that they're going to treat us like enemies of the state. So now they're catering to what they think is coming in. They're literally Timothy Snyder obeying in advance, right? So it is very alarming to be on those sets and watch how they're pivoting to make sure that they please the next administration. So I really do not think people should count on mainstream media giving you the truth moving forward if this is going to be their model. If their model is stay in business, make money, in the next administration, that means catering to that administration. So we really have an opportunity here for independent voices and independent media. This is a great time to not only scoop up all the viewers that mainstream media is losing by being so reckless with the truth, but also to pick up all the people that literally will never watch mainstream media anyway. Everyone Adam's age and younger are not getting their information from TV. They're not like my father sitting in front of the mainstream media. They're like my son watching his news on TikTok. So we have to cater to them. But it's also a great business model because they're hemorrhaging viewers. So where are those viewers going to go? And I think that's what we need to be focusing on.
To your followers.
Hopefully. That would be great.
Can I just also say one thing? One of my favorite things about Leigh and like a bunch of creators we worked with, Leigh is a New York Times best-selling author.
Period.
That has nothing to do with CNN. That is because she built an audience that trusts her across a bunch of platforms. And she also has an incredible husband who's amazing at production. Like that is, she's built a team and built a small thing, not a small thing at all, built a huge thing. But it's all off her back and her work. The more, going back to the Blue Sky piece, the more that we can do to make sure that people have like human resources. Like we were talking to a YouTuber the other day who's built 1 million+ followers on YouTube, pumps out incredible content, like doing like full 30-minute shows. And we're like, how are you feeling about TikTok? How are you feeling about Instagram? We're like, it's exhausting. I don't know how to do it. It's not my thing. Like I don't know where I'm going with it. And they don't have the resources to scale up on that. So if we want to talk about Blue Sky, there might be value there, but we have to put in the time and the effort. Like Leigh has put in the time and the effort to build an audience that's paid off in a lot of ways, and you see that in tangible things, like selling books, showing up in places around the country. Those are the proof points that we know we're breaking through with real people. We just got to keep doing more and more of that.
Yeah, I think we need to encourage the left wing to support that because we wouldn't know who Candace Owens is or Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirk unless they had been supported, not only by Russia, Tim Pool, but by right-wing donors here in America. They've really sponsored that entire ecosystem, and it has helped them so much win the messaging war, which I think is how we lost.
I think to one part of your question, you can probably speak to this very well as well, is that legacy media has a really hard time translating. There's really high production value in those studios. That's not what works online. Like what people trust, there's a huge degradation of public trust in institutions. The media is not immune from that. There's a lot of lack of trust in how the media approaches news. So when people know that like this is from the New York Times, they associate it from the New York Times, Washington Post, Fox News, whatever it may be, it's the people, individuals that they trust, and it's really hard. I think Snapchat had done a really good experiment on this, where they had legacy institutions doing shows with them and then converted some of their journalists into creators to do the same content, but do it less from a very highly produced studio approach to a much more endemic to the platform approach, and they saw huge success with that. So it's a lot of like also just media institutions knowing how to create one kind of content and not the other, and really struggling to invest in that, to find the creators to do that, to really make that a part of their like what they do, because for years they've invested so much in the model that we know today.
Some of the best voices on TikTok, and people ask me, it's like, if I started TikTok, what should I do? The best studio on TikTok is just setting your phone on your dashboard, because it's in your car. It's as trustable as it could possibly be, and it goes viral every time. So it's like, if you want to start an account and like actually put in, just sit in your car.
Well,
There's a reason for that.
Off that, which is the kind of the moving target in the room, which is the algorithm, right? We know that on platforms like TikTok and YouTube, the algorithm changes, and they also serve you content that you like. So if you're like me and you really have been watching a lot of miniature horses running around to techno music, that's all you're gonna get on your For You page for a whole week. So sorry, it's true, I'm not gonna lie. As we're talking to more and more creators on the left, we're encouraging people to start creating. What are some algorithm hacks that you would suggest using, or that you've found has worked in your work, that can get us out of our insular echo chambers for the people who follow us already?
I'll just say the algorithm is brutal, especially on TikTok. It's uniquely brutal. You're either getting 7 views or like 300,000, no in between. But then at the same time, it's brutal because it's like the free market. So when you're scrolling through the YouTube feed, you see all of these different thumbnails. And I liken it to walking through a grocery store and seeing all of these different types of cereals. And you want to choose a cereal that appeals to you. So when you're a creator, you got to look at it through a few lenses. You got to create something unique that not many other people can do. When I first started doing my Trump rally content, like Jordan Klepper does that, but he does it for Comedy Central. I do it in a very respectful manner where I'm not making fun of them. I'm trying to inch them towards our position. Show them that you want to put America first, we fund Ukraine, that's how we put America first, right? You can inch them towards our position. And that was unique. That was explosive. It went viral. And there's so many different ways you can do unique stuff. And then on a micro level, no matter what platform you're using and you want to create content, everything should have a hook. Whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on TikTok, it could be a 3 to 10 second hook to pull people in, make it interesting.
So what's an example?
If I were making a video about
this panel,
I could either go, 10 minutes into this panel, someone says something really interesting, blah, blah, blah. Or, you know how you scroll through TikTok and someone's like, this is insane, this is wild, or whatever. And you're like, wait, what's insane? I gotta watch this for a second. And then, you can pull people in. You don't have to be too in their face about it, but even when I'm on YouTube, I try to make the first 10 seconds very interesting. I try to pull them in and I'm like, I got to show you guys what Donald Trump was saying today. I hope you guys can see how absolutely absurd this is. And then they want to see what it is.
Mm. Yeah. Leigh, how about you? I mean, you are in the kitchen a lot.
This is why we need a team, because my brain's like, I don't do any of that. And that is why you need a team. You need a team of someone who's Adam's age being like, Leigh, do a hook at the beginning. I have never done that.
But this is the algorithm, right? I mean, you have over like 2.5 million followers
But
across
I
platforms.
think that the beauty of the internet is that there's room for a lot of different types of voices. And I think it's very important that we don't all jam ourselves into the same thing. Like, I don't think we should all be doing, like, I'm sure it works beautifully. So does rage baiting, right? That also works. My podcast airs on my network and on MeidasTouch. And on MeidasTouch, they always change the title of my podcast, right? So my podcast will be called A Way to Get Back to, whatever. And then on MeidasTouch, it'll be called Donald Trump Loses Everything. And I'm like, what the fuck? Because it's the same podcast. But they have a way of getting people in, and I don't do that. But I think that there is a reason people trust me, they believe me, they bought my book, they made it a bestseller, and I think that there's room for all of that. It comes back to authenticity, to trust, to why you're doing the work in the first place, and why we need to be supported by a bigger structure so that I can continue to do the work that's authentic to people, and they can say, I'm going to Leigh because I know she won't lie to me, and then someone else can figure out how to social media clip it into, the stratosphere.
You have different audiences.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, but just on that point, this goes back to like which platforms matter in silos. One of the things we see a ton of, Adam has a massive audience. If you look, I'm not gonna talk about your stats, but if you look at the audiences platform by platform, they're wildly different, right? And like one of the things like we beg people to understand in like the first conversation on any project is the face of the creator is not their audience, and their audience on one platform is the polar opposite on the other. And so we can share those pieces, but I think that's the thing. The tactics will always change on what actually draws the viewer in. The other part is consistency and actually having the energy. We know creators who won't come to certain events IRL because that means that's a day they aren't creating content. Even in the same town, there was something in California. We had a creator who lived an hour or less away from the event. Hour there, hour at the event, hour back. They're like, that's 3 hours I can't make content. That breaks my entire plan for the day, the week, and my numbers.
And
that
speaks to creating content, even though, yes, you can just hold a phone in front of your face and start talking to it. It is difficult, and it should be respected for the amount of work that it takes to do that. Just saying that is worth noting.
I was supposed to fly out at 9 after this because I want to be in studio all day tomorrow, but just so I could chill with you guys at the reception, I switched my flight to 6 a.m. tomorrow so I can be in studio.
That's right, we'd love to see it!
But the point is, you do have to be in studio as much as possible or else you're losing out to the competition.
Right, you need to be back in a chair at 10 a.m., right?
Yeah, I really do.
Should be, right.
The algorithm is very competitive, as I said. It's just, you always got to be.
Well, I think we can all agree that we on the left should be investing and following and supporting more content creators, both culture first and non-political, and political creators earlier and often. So my last question for this panel is, who in this room should people follow who is not a well-known political creator or perhaps maybe more well-known culture creator in your world, but who you think we should be supporting? And it can't be yourself, sorry.
I think that I'll name three: Vic Blends, the Pivot Podcast, and The Read. I think they're all excellent voices that authentically talk to an audience that we, as Democrats, constantly need and fail on a regular basis. And they're just really great shows. So if people, I don't know if anybody knows, Pivot Podcast is not Kara Swisher, it's the football podcast I'm talking about. The Pivot Podcast, hosted by Ryan Clark. The Read, hosted by Kid Fury and Crystal. Those are two podcasts that also have, the Pivot does really well on YouTube. That's a really important part for anybody who has a podcast. Make sure you do it on YouTube too. And then Vic Blends, which is a TikTok creator.
Was the question someone non-political that does?
Yeah, they're all non-political.
Non-political, or like lesser known political, maybe state-based. Obviously, everyone should be following Courier Media on their socials.
Well, if I can't say ourselves, definitely don't follow We Are Chorus on most platforms. There's no content there. That's the point. It's there to support others. But Elizabeth Booker Houston is a political creator, but she's also someone who had a very unique voice, who built a following very fast this year, is doing incredible things with a unique point of view and an amazing story that is nothing political in nature, just really had a thing she wanted to say to the world and has continued to do that. Follow her anywhere and everywhere. And then I think to the culture piece, my dream is to find a way to somehow get into the world of the Rights to Ricky Sanchez, which is a Philadelphia 76ers basketball podcast, but they also do the best ad reads that make you actually excited to look up the most random things because they built this incredible community. And I think that's the thing that if you look at the best creators in our space, they've built community, and that's the thing I always gravitate to.
Well, I'm a giant nerd, so it's hard for me to pick something that isn't political. I'm like, well, Heather Cox Richardson and Robert Reich and, David Rothkopf. Those are all people that I check to see what their opinions are on things. I like to check Timothy Snyder. I like to check Ruth Ben-Ghiat to see what they're saying about things. And I think they're going to be very important voices going into this next phase of America. If I was going to do something that wasn't political, but probably still has to do with America, because again, nerd. I would say This American Life. I still go back to that all the time because it reminds me of the simplicity and purity of this country and the storytelling that we used to do. But I really, I called my project Politics Girl for a reason, not just because I love politics and I think not enough people understood it and you can't fix something you don't understand. But I called it Girl for a reason too, not because I have some sort of illusions that I am still one, but because I think that girls don't scare men and women do. And I deliberately called it Girl to make it approachable to both men and women. And I actually have, if you can stand it, more male viewers than female viewers. And I think that's actually quite amazing. And my reaches goes from Gen Zs all the way up to retirees in Florida. And I think that if you could scale up the reach I have that I've done by myself with my husband, it would be amazing how many people are just starving for real information, starving for the truth, want to know things. It's painful that the lies won because they're going to become so obvious so quickly to people. And I think we have to be so ready to scoop up people as soon as the wool comes off their eyes. And so that's where I want to be at the exact right time.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any solid answers. I mean, I'm thinking I have some friends in Kyiv that run this podcast called Ukrainian Toronto TV. I don't know why they put Toronto in it, but they're in Kyiv, and they talk a lot about the war that is going on. There's someone named Vlad Vlexler on YouTube. He's one of the best. He's so good, right? He's so good. So, I mean, those two are people that I'd check out. They're not really apolitical, but they're really good. And then I listen to a lot of filmmaking podcasts. One of the best pieces of advice that I ever got from these podcasts, which since the time's running down, is everybody has ideas. I can guarantee you guys all, most of you live in DC, everyone in this room has some sort of unique idea, but the thing that differentiates you from other people is that you can actually execute on those ideas. Bring those ideas to reality. So just execute on whatever you're thinking of, because I know you guys are thinking of doing something in the next 4 years.
I have one because he's in the room and I've been looking at him the whole panel, who was on this content tour with me the last 6 weeks of the election. Jordy, I don't have your full handle, but Jordy is an amazing millennial pop culture content creator who also is able to seamlessly weave in really relevant, super important policy information. So just a plug for Jordy. Okay, in the words of Gwyneth Paltrow, that's it. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. This is the first panel. I am thrilled to be able to introduce Kyle Tharp. He's the managing editor of COURIER. We're going to have another panel come on, and they're going to talk a little bit more about the actual infrastructure, the media companies that need to be built, and how we're doing it. So, great. Thank you.
Sweet. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Kyle Tharp. I am the managing director of the national team here at COURIER, and I'm so excited to see everyone, and I'm really excited for this panel, and thank all of our previous panelists and our sponsors for coming tonight. So, we just talked a little bit about building sort of a bench of talent on the left, and now we're going to talk more about sort of the media brands and and ways that folks are investing in building some of these larger solutions. So I'm really excited to be joined by a couple folks who I love consuming their content and news and information. The first is Amelia Montooth, all right, who is the co-founder and CEO of Mutuals Media, which is a new startup which produces entertaining and cultural programming on platforms like TikTok. We also have Faiz Shakir, founder of More Perfect Union. It's a nonprofit media endeavor, yeah. They're focused on building power for working people, and I highly recommend you check out their YouTube channel. It's really good. There's Judd Legum, who is like a personal hero of mine. He's the founder of Popular Information and an independent journalist who has built a really powerful newsletter platform on Substack. And of course, my partner in crime, Tara McGowan, who is publisher of COURIER, which is, as you all know, it's a pro-democracy local news network with social-first newsrooms in 11 states. So thanks, guys, for coming. So those of us that have worked in politics for a while know that after every election cycle, past 10 years, there's been so much hand-wringing about, how should progressives invest more in building their own media infrastructure. Now, post this election, it seems to be a major part of the conversation, as many of you know, in terms of shoring up our democracy and being a bulwark against the incoming administration. These folks are building and talking about these types of solutions all the time. So my first question for you guys is, I assume you agree that more investment is needed in the space and independent, emerging pro-democracy media. What type of media building should those investments prioritize? And we'll start with Amelia.
Thank you so much for that question.
Yeah.
As the CEO of a media company, it would be crazy if I didn't say invest in media companies. So I have to start there and say that I think there's something really special about kind of the network effect rather than investing in individual people. There's something legitimizing not only for the creators but also for the platform itself if you're investing in these actual networks that are building. I hate to use this example, but I literally have to because there's no other, but like Marvel universes of like our creators who people can get parasocially invested not only in that one person, but in the whole kind of world that you're building, and that can allow you to build new media platforms, new, individual people and so on. So I think if you're investing in networks as opposed to individual people, that can be really powerful. And I think if you're investing in individual people, something I think that we don't always consider in the democratic space, I hate to say this too, but it's like star quality. Like, does this person have the it factor? Is this somebody that you would want to see on TV? Is this somebody who you would watch be on Love is Blind? Like, is this someone who's gonna be funny and entertaining and have really a star quality that goes beyond just them providing a message that you agree with? I think identifying that is a really important step in like finding the right people to invest in for the future of our leftist media.
Yeah, and for Faiz, like what do you think sort of the goal of building new media should be?
One of the goals, there's lots of them, so I welcome other people having additional ones, but I think, for me, no surprise to you, I feel like understanding the rigged nature of our economy is such a powerful element. The fact that we have such great income and wealth inequality is understood by the public. The fact that we have a rigged economy is understood by the public, but they don't. The level of detail that you're able to understand about when a corporation makes a stock buybacks move and what it did against its workers is just not information that is readily consumable. And so I will read things on the Wall Street Journal every single day. And I'll give you a couple examples. Today I just opened the paper and there was a story about Ozempic. And Ozempic is trying to get onto employer-sponsored health insurance plans to ensure and make sure that employers are paying them, the company, to provide the drug. But from a working class perspective, what do you care about? The price of the damn drug. What is the price of this drug? And I think that those kinds of stories of just understanding how the hell this is going on. Another good example is a credit card company say, another story in Wall Street Journal, credit card companies say, despite record numbers of defaults, they think that the stocks are going to be doing fine this year. So that's an investor perspective on the fact that, from a working class perspective, holy shit, did you just tell me that there's a huge number of credit card defaults coming this year? What does that mean? What is the implications of that? I mean, you go down the lines of every day I feel like I'm consuming these kinds of stories of sports betting. Great market opportunities for sports betting. What's going on with sports betting with working class people? More people falling into bankruptcy, getting conned in the experience of watching a sports game. You're getting conned into being a sucker of losing money. And so I just think that the opportunities in this moment where the nature of the economy is so complex, so difficult, in which the top 1% doesn't just have wealth, they have knowledge, they have networks, they have each other's backs, as we're seeing with Elon and the way he's executing a Department of Government Efficiency. They are a cartel of a kind, working against tens of millions of people. And the challenge for all of us is to have some degree of knowledge base so that we can tell that from a working class perspective, and that is hard to come by. And so I would love to see more media that is trying to endeavor to figure that out.
Judd, what are your thoughts?
I guess I think I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective because I haven't really had any investors in my newsletter, and I think that I think that there should be more investment, because clearly there needs to be a much more robust media infrastructure that is talking about issues that are important to the progressive movement. I think that's something that's severely lacking. But I also think that when you're doing that work, there needs to be a discipline to it. And so one of the benefits of the way that I have things set up is you have to produce something that is valuable enough to people that they're willing to pay for it. And that requires you to kind of keep digging and working harder. Now, you don't have to, you can still work equally hard, funded by a different model, but I think that there's probably a space for more of both things. And I also think that one thing that I think is basically not going on at all, which could be very powerful, is having people who are making investments in media properties to get them started and giving them a runway, and then ultimately allowing them to sort of go off and not need investment anymore. Yeah. And that's something that I don't think kind of exists. There's sort of the people who are doing it kind of on a for-profit basis, and then there's the nonprofit side to it, but there's not a lot of in between. I do think, though, that, as much as the media industry is kind of, having a hard time of it now, and lots of journalists are getting fired, and, that's not good, all sorts of, especially in the local news, complete news deserts. I do think fundamentally people care about the information that they receive, and they are willing to pay for it. But it's just a matter of providing them with something that they think is valuable. And so if it's the same thing that everyone else has, that's not going to be enough. So.
Yeah, I think for Tara, I'm really interested. I'm teeing this up because I probably know all of your answers, but I wanted to say I think what COURIER is really focused on has been on this one audience of folks that's been left behind. So how does sort of investments in media building reach beyond folks that want to pay for news?
So I actually, it's probably a switch. I want to actually talk about why, some of the reasons why there isn't more investment in a media ecosystem that actually promotes our values and reaches people in authentic ways. And that I will obviously bring it back to that point in particular, which is everybody is in an echo chamber. And the people that have the most money, because we do not have a shortage of money on our side, by the way, right? Over $2.5 billion spent on this presidential election just on the Democratic side this cycle. We don't have a shortage of resources. It's how they're consolidated and spent. And a lot of that comes down to, frankly, laziness and our donors being wildly out of touch with where the American people are on every level, both in terms of the actual issues related to the economy in a lot of ways, and some of that is self-serving, right? But some of it is just the fact that a lot of our donors are of an older generation, and they don't actually know how the majority of Americans consume information today. And so kind of to the point that Judd was making, you have to give people something of value for them to give you money. When we're talking at the levels of investment that we need to actually build media that can build power, that comes down to understanding that this is what has to happen in order to inform and engage people to participate and to have parity with all of the disinformation and misinformation out there. And Kyle and I schemed up this idea 4 years into Courier's tenure to start a national brand that was not focused on our core audience of low information, less politically engaged, less voting Americans, because we were having such trouble getting people to understand the value in Courier because they didn't see the value in it for themselves. So we literally created a channel that provided progressive political content that donors would understand the value in. And it worked, by the way. And it worked also in terms of audience engagement because of how the algorithms work, because now we're one of the biggest political news accounts on TikTok, and that's a huge credit to Kyle and his team that built that, a very scrappy team, one of our smallest teams at Courier. And yet I think truly that what needs to happen is that we need to have investors and donors on our side that are willing to say, I may not understand this, and I may not also know or like the people who end up with this money. But by the way, I don't think that they know most of the consultants that end up with the commission fees that come out of their checks, truly to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars every cycle. And so I hope that in this moment, like there was a brief window after 2016, that people who do write these massive checks and do make these investment decisions on our side really do have a little bit of moment of self-awareness and introspection and courage. And courage to invest in things that they might not understand with an acknowledgement that what they have been putting their money into isn't cutting it. And I just haven't really seen that, and Courier would not exist, nor would have acronym before it, if there weren't some really risk-inclined Silicon Valley investors like Reid Hoffman that were willing to take risks. And now we're one of the biggest progressive media networks in the country, and that's not saying much. 5 million subscribers should not be one of the biggest, everybody. That's pitiful. And that is because even with all of the investment we've gotten, it has not been enough. And I think it goes to the broader ecosystem where we have to be less precious and we have to be willing to invest in people and creators and voices that don't agree with us on everything. And we also can't be pearl clutching anymore about the old, out of touch ways in which media worked that felt really good, where it was non-biased and objective, which was always a crock of bullshit, and actually be really honest that if we want to have power in order to protect the most vulnerable communities in this country, we're going to have to do things that make sense and not that used to make sense 20 years ago.
And if I could just dovetail on that really quickly, something that we've seen at Mutuals is that we're building a very culture-forward media network. And that's something that a lot of people really struggle to understand what the political efficacy of that is. But I would say Barstool Sports is one of the most successful media companies that has, managed to make it through every single pivot and transition within the media landscape. And they're not seen as a political entity. But there is a Wikipedia page called Barstool Sports Conservatism that I think all of you should read if you haven't, because it's real. They're talking about sports, they're talking about music, they're talking about Love Island and entertainment, but they're talking about all of it from a very conservative point of view. They're imbuing their conservative ideology into all of their pop culture content, and I think that's where the left is really struggling, and that's what our goal with Mutuals has been since we came up with this idea 2 years ago, is to build a Barstool Sports of the left. And something we struggle to convince donors of is how that's actually a really important political tool. Even if we're not talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, which, love her, but even if we're not talking about that, there's still a lot of political efficacy in talking about pop culture issues from a very liberal perspective and from a liberal lens. I've seen that in my own content. When I talk about ballerina farms, I'm not hashtagging Joe Biden, I'm not hashtagging the Democrats, I'm talking about ballerina farms. That video on my personal account got over 3 million views. And I was talking about, the pipeline, I wasn't talking about electoral politics, but that's having an impact on someone who is probably not consuming any kind of political news outside of that. And that's the playing field that Democrats really need to be in, and that's kind of our goal with Mutuals and with our show Gaydar, is we can hashtag Sabrina Carpenter, we should hashtag Troye Sivan, all the people we're talking about in our video, and in the middle of that video we'll talk about the Supreme Court for one question, or we'll talk about Ron DeSantis and the Don't Say Gay bill for a second question. But we're getting to the For You pages of people who are only consuming pop culture content, and I think that's a place where we really lose people to the right. Ben Shapiro isn't talking about the ins and outs of Congress. Ben Shapiro is talking about Barbie, and we should be talking about Barbie too.
I think one big context here that I think the previous panel talked a little bit about are the platforms themselves. And Tara touched on the echo chamber piece. I'm wondering about what are your thoughts in terms of the lowest hanging fruit or biggest opportunities in terms of platforms for reaching some of these people that maybe wouldn't be consuming mainstream news, or maybe they're left behind. Particularly, whether it's YouTube, Substack, TikTok, or whatever. Maybe Faiz, if you want to go first.
Well, YouTube is obviously the biggest streaming platform. There's a lot of conversation about Netflix, and it's not. It's YouTube. And as more and more people get off cable and move to YouTube TV, I think it will have a huge opportunity. And we're on, More Perfect Unions on Instagram and TikTok and Substack and all of them. And one of the reasons I loved, and I think YouTube has a great gateway to more and more growth for us, and hopefully for a progressive community, is that your behavior when you go to YouTube is different than your behavior elsewhere. Amelia would be a great example for me here. So she's watching, a movie, and she's scrolling TikTok and she's scrolling Instagram.
True.
But if you're not going to watch that movie and try to watch the YouTube, you're picking one or the other, and think about your behavior when you watch or listen to a podcast. It's similar, right? You went there as a destination to get information to consume. That's the similar with YouTube, right? You saw it in visual form, but you went there as a destination. You weren't necessarily going da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I think that opportunity, when you can clutch people in that direction, whether it is a podcast or YouTube or something that has depth to it, now you can start working on the persuasion stuff, right? Now you can start to hopefully, talk to some folks about challenging their prior assumptions, giving them some new information, but it's harder to do that with just a scroll. So that's kind of a more strategic investment direction that I would argue for.
Judd, I'm curious about your take, because you've built just like a singularly massive newsletter audience, I think close to 400,000 subscribers at this point. What do you think folks are missing in terms of sort of the newsletter space?
Well, I don't think, it's working now. Great, perfect. I think that the benefit of newsletters is that it's based on email. And, one of my fundamental belief, and I think that more people need to understand this, is that all of the platforms are working against the progressive movement. And they're antagonistic to progressive politics. It's been that way for some time. Obviously, Twitter or X is just, that's very self-evident, but all of the meta properties are suppressing all political news because it does not make them as much money. Or I don't know what their reason is. I think that's probably it. But that's actually beneficial to the right, because if you look, the lowest information voters are the ones that are voting more Republican. So if you suppress as much political news as possible, you're going to benefit the Republican side. I think Faiz is right about video content. I just don't know if I would trust that YouTube is going to be helpful. I think over time, they all are helpful until they're not helpful. So I think it's just important to have a strategy that doesn't depend on any of the platforms. Fundamentally, I think the purpose of this content should be to take on powerful entities and to be antagonistic towards them. And so if you are reliant on an algorithm controlled by a large corporation, it probably will come back to bite you in the end. So circling back around, email is not completely separate from that, but it's the closest thing that we have to it. So the way I view the platforms is I'm trying to just pull people from whatever platform I can for as much time as I can and get them into the email space so that I can then have a direct connection to them that's not reliant on an algorithm. So since the election, that's been blue sky. That's been growing. I don't know how long that will last, but as long as it's around, I'll continue to use it. And then we'll see what the next thing is. But I just think that, you know, and this is, I'm not immune to this. I kind of fell in love with sort of the floods of traffic that you used to get from Facebook and other things, but it never lasts. So that would be my approach to platforms, is you can just be opportunistic with them, but you shouldn't view any of them as like a long-term strategy.
And you guys both know, because I don't know if everyone realizes this, but both Faiz and Judd were both like OG Think Progress staffers, founders.
As was Tanya.
As was Tanya. If anyone remembers Think Progress from like 2010 or
the only
2005,
progressive media we had.
It was like, yeah, our big thing. And I remember like clicking on links on my Facebook page in college of Think Progress articles. And now Facebook does not really let you promote links anymore. Tara, yeah, what are your thoughts on platforms?
I want to build on that because I think that's a really important point, and it's also why we need to invest much more heavily in creators, like the folks that were on the last panel, and so many others, and especially people that don't necessarily talk about politics very often or at all, because they're the ones who are building direct relationships, and hopefully they also are or can be persuaded to start to translate and migrate those relationships into email and SMS and other personal information, so they can maintain that communication and those relationships with the audiences they build off of the platforms. This isn't only important for the platforms putting their thumb on the scale, which they will always do, and they're all pretty gleeful about this regime change that's occurring. But also because we have to be clear-eyed about what this means in this regime change. We can't sugarcoat it. Like, they are going to shut down channels and accounts and media companies and reporters that boldly oppose this government. They have said it, and they do what they say. So when our team thinks about contingency planning for Courier, right, we want to grow and grow and grow, but growing to build those direct relationships, but also to build a bench of talent at the local level across this country that knows how to communicate to audiences really effectively where they are, is one of the best hedges we have against authoritarianism. We need people to understand the power that they have as communicators, and that is where media is today. It is about individuals, right, who earn trust. So yes, aggregated and networks like Courier are so critical for creating efficiency and scale of reach of messaging and content, but they can be shut down. And so what do we have against that? We have individuals. It's much harder to silence everybody in all of the ways that they can. And that's, you know, when you look at authoritarian governments and the populations there and how civic uprisings and civil disobedience happens, it's really because of underground communications that occurs. And we have to really be honest about that might be where we end up. And so how are we working to build that instead of trying to build the thing that would have gotten us over the line this past election, which many of us were trying very hard to do for a long time? We have to now think ahead to and understand what do we have to do and invest in now to put us in a position of strength so we can actually empower people with information to stand up against this authoritarian regime and oligarchy.
Yeah. And Amelia, you all have really emphasized working on some of these vertical video platforms and really like writing the algorithms. Like, what have you learned about that?
Yeah, I think what we learned is to really invest in the content rather than the platform. So what we think is really important is finding and creating and building a really sticky, organic community. With Gaydar, we have over 250,000 followers. We launched that show on July 22nd, so it's been just over 4 months. And that audience is deeply engaged. They sit on our accounts and they comment first every time we post. We post at the same time twice a week. That audience is so invested in what we do that we've already started kind of moving them over to YouTube, which is notoriously difficult to do on TikTok, but we've been able to do that successfully. So I think the thing is like creating content that people really love and feel like they see themselves in and they were missing. Gaydar is our show that is really aimed at a queer audience. It's a very authentically queer show. It's very Z-way coded. And that was a niche in the market that we saw. There was a gap. People weren't making that kind of content on TikTok. And so that's an audience who feels really seen, who feels really engaged, who feels really, invested in the show itself, and they see themselves reflected in that. And so that makes it a lot easier for us to move that audience to other places. If TikTok gets banned, let's hope that doesn't happen. But if it does, that's why we've invested in making the show such a repeatable format, something that people know what to expect when they see it, something that people know what they get when they see Anania's face on the screen, and they know that they'll follow that show wherever it ends up, whether it's YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, Signal someday, maybe, if we're living in that world. But I think people will follow that show because it's the only place that they're getting that kind of high quality content that they wanted.
So it's about community, not necessarily just the platform.
Exactly.
I think, it's really hard to have a conversation about progressive media without kind of talking about like right-wing media, which like Democrats love to talk about. I mean, we can like mention all of them, but I'm curious, like a lot of right-wing media outfits have been successful in part, not necessarily because of like strategic philanthropy, but really because they have cracked the code in terms of monetization of their audience really effectively. Companies like the Daily Wire, they have like this tagline, like stop giving your money to companies that hate you, trying to like adopt this countercultural community. I think Jeremy Boring at the Daily Wire, there was some snafu with like Harry's razors or something. Do you guys know what happened like a year or two ago? They ended up selling like 50,000 like $5 a month razor subscriptions for like Jeremy's Razors, which is their own razor brand. So they find these build community and then find ways to monetize it. How do you think sort of progressives should approach monetization of media? Each four of your different outfits have all sort of approached different kind of revenue generating opportunities. So I'm really curious about that. And maybe we'll start with Tara.
Yeah, we all have really different funding models, which I think is really interesting on here. And I think that's important because we have to have diversified models. But the short answer is that in order to make money, you have to have money. You have to put money into it. And again, it kind of comes back to my earlier point that they do have pretty ruthless investors who get a really strong economic return on their investment when Republicans are elected and they renew the tax Trump credits. They do. And so ours are pretty purely altruistic. They lose money when progressives win power. And so it's a little bit of a harder sell. Also, a lot of the products that make an enormous amount of money on the right are disinformation products. They're literal fake vitamins that are now going to be sold by potentially the head of the Health and Human Services of our federal government. And so, we know how powerful disinformation is. We know how susceptible the population can be to it, and now it is going to be the only communications that are really enabled in this country. So I do think that we have to figure out ways to pool investments into experimentation and innovation in a way that has not been done, at least in my tenure in this space, to actually figure out, because there are more people who share our values. There are more people who are going to be frightened and anxious and already are about what's to come. And that is not to capitalize on that or to manipulate the way that the other side does, but there is opportunity in that to build community, to foster community, to empower people in the ways that they feel like they can have an impact, which for most people is actually small dollar donations or purchasing power. And I think that actually dovetails into the story we need to be telling every day about the economy to meet people where they are on this stuff. And I think that there is opportunity there, but the issue is there aren't a lot of ideas put on the table because there isn't money ready to invest in them. So again, it comes into like, where are the folks that are willing to actually put money into this, to experiment, to explore, to fund what sounds like crazy ideas and see what sparks. And I think that that's kind of the culture that we all need to create now as we think about underground work in communications and organizing and network and protection, as we think about how we communicate more effectively and how we think about resourcing the movement and the information ecosystem we need.
Faiz, I know More Perfect Union, you all are set up as a nonprofit, but you've also, been really successful on YouTube. I assume that comes with some like platform revenue share. What have you learned about kind of monetization, or is it just like pennies compared to?
There's more Think Progress of it, actually, man. So if you think of like the Think Progress, where we came from, it was a nonprofit.
Yeah.
We were incubated within a nonprofit, and I feel like that's been, in my mind, even become more important in this age for us. I'll get to that in a second. But I'll give you a stat. I think this year we're going to get about 100 million views on YouTube. You want to take a guess as to how much ad revenue we're going to get off of 100 million views?
I would say $200,000.
Close to $200,000.
Really? Wow. All right.
Right. So,
all right.
He knows his algorithms
Yeah,
and his
I know my
math.
YouTube.
Just hire Kyle for some business
Why
advice.
we haven't invested as much in YouTube at Courier yet.
But so with a staff of 30 full-time people, 200,000 ain't gonna get me more than a staffer and a half.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge if you think about this as a for-profit model. And that's why I have, so I start with, when I said nonprofit, the reason why I care about that nonprofit is I haven't seen much in the new modern media environment where you can try to reach scale in a profitable way. What I see going on around the landscape, and you take a number of the new media organizations that come around, like a Semaphore, a Punch Bowl, we can go down the list of a bunch of others, Puck, and there's a whole series of others I'm forgetting. You find that there's a model of needing to get wealthy donors to give in, VCs, and having an island or a moat of your, whatever you want to call that number, 200,000. I think, if I'm correct, I believe Punch Bowl makes a lot of money off of events in DC, Axios, Political Pro newsletter. They have to do events in DC. I think the events in DC end up tending to be one of their better revenue makers. So if you're going to do, Capitol Hill content, then you also do exclusive events with the Capitol Hill lawmakers. You invite some lobbyists in, and then they pay for it, which, it's a model, right? That's a way you can make money. What I worry that is if you're trying to reach 40 or 50 million people with content, I haven't, because of the way the algorithms were working, and Judd, kindly explained the problems and the challenges with it, you're going to start reaching that scale. I haven't seen how you turn that into either subscriber or ad revenue that merits maintaining it. So I can see that the opportunities to get to the 40 or 50 million are there. I can't see that the marginal return on profitability for reaching the 40, 50. In fact, if you think about scale, there will be a point in time at which, Kyle, you think about this where you start to reach more and more people, but it becomes a diminishing return. You're spending more money to reach more and more people, and at that point, you're making a nonprofit investment, right? Saying, hey, I actually just want to reach people. So that's my own concern and view, and I think there's obviously merit to the fact that you'd have nonprofit funders who care about trying to advance good quality journalism, and that's where I see the future.
Yeah, Amelia, you were talking to me last week about different ways that you guys are experimenting with advertising and sponsorship stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Mutuals is a for-profit company, and I totally see and respect the need for nonprofit media as well, and I think everything you said is completely accurate. But I think we're in a really exciting transition of the media space. There's a lot of ways to do media now that are very low overhead, that are, with Gaydar, we've reached over 65 million views in just the past 4 months. We've been able to put brand sponsors on our content, and these brand sponsors, we've pursued some from the public sector, from the political world, and also from the private sector. We've seen a lot of success in the private sector brand deals, and that's something that I think is really important for the left-leaning media to really compete with, like the Barstool Sports. Barstool Sports is a for-profit company. Barstool Sports, I think that kind of forces you to be a little bit more reactive to the market and to figure out, how am I going to make content that's really going to reach people and have an impact, but that's also going to get brand dollars. And something that we've seen is like the brand dollars don't really care as much about what you're saying if you have an audience. So if you can really grow an audience and build an audience, and people are watching and they love your host, they love your show, and they're gonna click the link in bio, and as long as it's like a brand and values aligned and brand sponsor, and I think that's a really important model that more people need to consider as well, because I think it allows us to really compete on the level that they're competing on, and I think it also provides a level of legitimacy for some consumers and some audiences to see their favorite brand, with their creators, and to see it kind of give it that heightened experience. I think that's something that we should consider in addition to the really powerful nonprofit media that we have.
Amelia, if you were just doing purely political news, would you feel the same way about scale and profitability?
I feel like if I was doing purely political news, I would be on Patreon all day. I would be building things in a totally different model. So I absolutely hear what you're saying there. But I also think, Pod Save America has proven that that's a possibility. I think it's also interesting to consider that like they built a really big platform, and therefore people want to put ads on that show because they have an audience. And I think that that's something that we want to try to continue to build, is like, how do we build these shows that have big enough audiences that brands don't really care what we're saying, as long as like the audience is there and they'll click. So that's why I think investing in the content is really important.
Can I just say one more thing on this? How many people in here worked on a campaign or for a committee or a consultancy that did media in this past election in the room?
Oh, this past one.
A lot of you. So another way to support building this ecosystem and diversifying the way we inform is to put some of that money into progressive media, which didn't happen this cycle, by the way. And there's a lot of different reasons for it, but y'all did put a lot of money into Zuckerberg's pockets and into Google's pockets and maybe even Elon Musk's pockets to get your message across. And I think that we also need to just take a long-term take in terms of what we need to do and how we're going to do it moving forward, and that investing in advertising, I'm saying with your messaging, not other ways of supporting it, but actually advertising on different progressive and pro-democracy media channels is one way to support long and short-term goals. And that is something that I think needs to change immediately.
Let me add a policy point to what Tara's saying about this. The Biden Department of Justice has brought a case against Google ad tech case. One of the issues there is, for those of us on YouTube, we were just talking about this with Kyle, I can't sell my ads to Planned Parenthood, Greenpeace. I can't have my own ad inventory. When Judd and I worked together at Think Progress, we had a website that was the core base of a lot of our traffic. We sold ad inventory. Now the platforms basically deny you the opportunity. It's all, to Tara's point there, it's all going into the platforms for them to monetize and not give you any degree of control over it. So if you were to buy, if you were to build your own platform on TikTok or YouTube or Facebook, you are also deprived as being a small business who can control that inventory. Imagine how much more power we'd have to say, okay, I've got some ad inventory to play with. I'm going to go pump it to these places. But instead, that control has been deprived out of us by the platforms. And one of the things we need to do is break up the monopoly so that you continue to give some more power back to these small business creators.
Yeah, one thing I want to ask before we move on from monetization is for Judd. Just similarly, you may not be selling $5 a month Razor subscriptions, but you are really effectively selling sort of a massive subscription model that's been highly successful. I think Substack even has made you kind of their poster boy for what success looks like on the platform. What have been your learnings about the most compelling ways to get people to convert to that kind of stuff?
Well, I'd like to preface this by saying if anyone wants to give me money, I'm very easy to get in contact with.
That is one of the goals of this event.
But I've never taken any money to start Popular Information, and it's all funded by people who give $50, who buy a $50 subscription that doesn't get them much other than supporting the newsletter. And I do think, so I do think that's possible. I don't view this as mutually exclusive. I think this can go on both tracks, that we should be building nonprofit media, we should be building for-profit media, we need lots more of everything. But there is an advantage as well, I think, to selling those subscriptions, because what you find is when people buy in, they're going to then read the emails, and they're also going to tell people about it, and they're very invested. And you need those people who are invested to grow the whole list, which is, of course, really the mission of it, is to reach as many people as possible. But to me, it changes. The messages change that allow you to convert people, but it's part of my job is to figure out how to do that. I think one of the things that always works is if you can show what your impact is in the world. You reported on this topic and then this thing happened. People want to see impact, and good journalism will, not always, but sometimes it will have that impact. That works. But it's interesting what happens. When Jeff Bezos decided to kill the endorsement of Harris because, I don't know, he's worried about his spaceship contracts or whatever. That was a good day for me. People responded to that message that, hey, maybe we shouldn't have all of the media that we're consuming be controlled by billionaires. And I think that there's a lot of potential. Maybe I'm just a little bit too optimistic, or maybe my ambitions for scale are not quite as high as they should be, but I do think that it is possible to continue to grow. I've got an idea for a new newsletter that I'm going to spin out. And I'm going to be the investor because I think it's going to make money.
Did we just get that exclusive at Courier?
And I might be wrong about that, but we'll see. But I do think that, you know, the media landscape is always changing. There's always opportunities, and what people pay for and are interested in 5 years from now is going to look a lot different than it is now. So it's just a matter of thinking about how the world is changing, where the gaps are, and trying to fill that in. And I think that that's going to be a big part of whether or not, you know, progressive-oriented media can kind of close that gap, is whether people are able to do that, both kind of on the for-profit side and the nonprofit side. Can we not try to replicate and say, you know, how do we create the next Joe Rogan, or how do we do whatever worked the last time, but look forward and try to say what's going to happen next and how do we get there? And so that's what I'm interested in, and that process, it's of converting people from a free subscriber to a paid subscriber is a very interesting process, and it, you know, fundamentally the way you're successful is just to keep iterating, keep changing, keep thinking about it, and you know, you can find enough messages that work.
Well, thank you all for being a part of this. We have like 2 minutes before we get a red light and we all get to go drink alcohol and have some food. I just want to give you guys the opportunity for any sort of 30-second closing thoughts on how folks in this audience should think about moving forward. Maybe Tara, if you want to start and go down the line.
Support in every way, shape, and form media and creators that are on the right side of history, the right side of the issues, and that are going to be absolutely essential in this fight that is going to look very different than the last time around. It's going to be far more challenging in a lot of ways, and that can mean everything to emailing your very rich uncle, to becoming a member of Judd's popular information newsletter, to supporting Courier's newsrooms, to supporting For Perfect Union, to just spreading the word about this stuff. I just think that it is going to take all of us to build a community around this, so we stop having the same circular conversations about why we don't have what the other side has or how we got to this place, and instead we are excited and joyful about what we're building and the difference that it's making.
Awesome. Amelia, why don't you go next? And also tell us how we can follow you guys on social.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow Gaydar Show on TikTok and Instagram, or Mutuals Media on the same platforms. I would say that I think something that's really important for us in democratic politics to consider is not reinventing the wheel. I think we tend to do that a lot. And I think with media, there's already a lot of people making incredible media that some of us already consume and already love. Share that content with your friends, follow it, subscribe it, donate to it if they have that option. I think it's really time for each of us to do our individual investment into the media that we like and want to see more of. Comment on videos, like videos, follow people. I think all of that. And I think also really consider the shows that you watch that you think are really interesting. I think have a critical lens and a critical eye when you're consuming media content, and look for the places where you can have a more vocal support. And like I said earlier, follow Gaydar Show on TikTok and Instagram. You'll laugh, I promise.
Awesome. Faiz?
We got to win again in 2026 and 2028. I got to say, as much as I care about media, I also care about winning. And I want to see some races turn. And I think the way in which we get there is some of the success of these media enterprises. They will show us the path. If we're doing it right and we're doing it well, and you're rewarding content with your clicks, that you are helping shape a direction of a party, a center left, that is looking for it. They're out in the wilderness kind of hunting. The elites that they are of this party, whoever they might be, are looking around and saying, what's the path forward? How do we get people back? And part of, I think, if we're doing this right, is we're showing it, not telling it. We're showing it.
Judd, you get the last word.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what I'll close on is I think that there was a lot of worry following the results of this election that the people who are interested in progressive issues, progressive media, were going to just be sick of everything and kind of crawl into a hole. But that has not been my experience over, since Election Day. I think that there's lots of people who are really energized, and so I'm, enthused about that, and it makes me want to get up and work really hard to see what we can build. So I think that there's always short-term disappointment, but there's always opportunity, in the long term if we keep working. And I think that the media is the place where, the country needs fundamental change, not just a messaging tweak, and the media is the way that that's going to happen.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much, everyone. And I think, Tara, are you going to close this out, or are we?
I just want to thank our sponsors.
Yeah.
Who put advertising dollars into letting us put this event on.
Absolutely.
So Chorus and Movement Labs, thank you guys so much for sponsoring this. We are going to do a lot more events like this. We would love sponsors, so let us know if you want to get engaged. And everybody, drinks and small bites will be out in that area. So thank you all so much for coming. Hang out with us for a little while longer.
Awesome.
Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.